We'll get started on the rest of our program for this afternoon. I think we got Todd Buckley here from the North Dakota Game and Fish Department to visit with us a little about what's happening with the Salt Cedar. Todd?
I don't know if I need a microphone or can you guys hear me without? Can I just yell? I don't know. maybe I get by without. Okay, so Todd Buckley with the Game and Fish Department, out of our Williston district office there. And I guess I'll be talking about today's salt cedar on the Missouri and Yellowstone rivers. So really the area that we're going to focus on in by Williston there, we got the Missouri River and the Yellowstone, and then they come together at the confluence right about there. So, and then that's the Montana border. So that's really the area that I'm going to speak about today, and a lot of the data that we have is specific to this area of the state. And just a little bit about salt cedar. It's a deciduous tree species. It's native to the Mediterranean region. It resembles kind of shrubby conifers. If you guys know Arborvitae, it's real similar in appearance to that. Mature trees range anywhere from 5 to 25 feet. They're not necessarily that tall in North Dakota, but again, just in other areas, where they're native to and that, they're 5 to 25 feet. They are a long-lived species, 50 to 100 years. They do have that reddish brown bark and the bluish green leaves that are really indicative of them when you're IDing them. They do have a single taproot, so kind of just almost that carrot that goes down into the ground. And they also have the white and pink flowers on them. It varies in that whitish, pinkish, depending on the plant. And then they have really pepper-sized seed, all that, those small seeds. And then the seeds do have a pappus, which aids in wind and water dispersal that's on them. So a really exaggerated version of that would be like a dandelion. They're not that exaggerated on them. I mean, they're pepper green size, but that's the structure we're talking about. So salt cedar the good, you might not, it'll be the good, the bad, the ugly. So I don't know. So salt cedar the good, it's an easy to establish ornamental tree. They do have aesthetic appeal. They can look pretty, they can look pretty. That's obviously probably why they came over, but for ornamentals, but the main reason they originally came over probably would have been stream bank stabilization, erosion and wind control, wind breaks. They were really useful for them, for those purposes. The wood from mature trees is suitable for furniture making, other crafts. It's a really dense wood and it's got kind of a really rich color on mature trees. Many pollinators use the flowers, and actually there is an endangered species in the southwest of the U.S., the southwest willow flycatcher, that in those areas they dammed a lot of their rivers and they divert for a lot of irrigation. So their natural habitat of basically sandbar and willows and all of that stuff that they would have nested in are kind of gone. And really the replacement has been this invasive salt cedar. But that's really kind of actually the invasion of salt cedar has really brought this species back from the brink of extinction. So you have those, and it's a pretty tiny bird, but that's kind of one of the, I guess, the success stories with salt cedar. It has benefited some species. The bad, it's many weedy characteristics. So high seed production, over 500,000 seeds can be produced by a large mature tree. They're highly mobile, again, in wind and water. That pappus, they can spread in the wind, and then on water, that pappus will help them float on the water. They get washed down. They can create a monoculture in areas without much competition. They can really do that dense canopy shading, and they are pretty tolerant of everything. They tolerate multi-year droughts. They actually will, since they're deciduous, they'll shed their leaves to save themselves. So they'll almost go into this dormancy in extreme drought. But they also do tolerate flooding. So drought doesn't necessarily kill them. Flooding doesn't necessarily kill them. They're definitely a survivor. They can survive studies have shown up to 3 months of inundation before they probably have some way to die off after that. The ugly about them, large mature trees can use over 200 gallons of water per day. So in some of those areas like Southwest US, that's a lot of water in areas, or you think like California and all that, like all these places where water's really precious, they can definitely have an impact on that. They can lower your water table, severely reduce the stream flow, or even stop it altogether when they get really, really dense, which has an impact on ag and municipal water supplies that a lot of these places rely on. Again, a lot of stuff desert Southwest, think that ecosystem, but we do have it up here. It's not to that extent up here, thankfully, but in those places, it is a major issue. And it also does, even though there's the one kind of exception of native wildlife, like any of these things, it displaces native vegetation and wildlife species. And mechanical removal, very expensive, and fire they've tried, but it's rarely successful because on those really large trees, they do have that tap roots, those reserves are there, and it can resprout from that. So this is probably like, that's a photo this is a North Dakota one, and it does have that tap root, but that's only like a 5-6 footer. That's the tap root on it. Well, imagine what the tap root would look like on a 25 footer. That's desert Southwest with a big excavator. So yeah, you're looking at a lot of reserves to do that. So that's why some of those once you get to trees that size, you're really behind the 8 ball there. Probably talk about the man, the myth, the legend. No, we're not gonna. No, we won't go through that. We'll just go through some of the myths. There's a lot of thoughts that salt cedar exudes or it rains out salt, that's where it comes from. But there is a noticeable salt concentration in the leaves, and under the microscope, sometimes in certain conditions, you can see little accumulations, but it's not like it's sitting here like a salt shaker and raining it on the ground and basically creating the Bonneville salt flats. It's not going to do that. But the concentrations that we see it's really in soils that have very dense stands, and a lot of times these coincide with saline areas that have very little native vegetation to begin with, or it's spotty, so they're colonizer of those areas, and it was a naturally probably salty soil to begin with. And this could also be likely related to water table issues. It does establish very well in saline soils, but again, like I said, competition's really low, and from previous, it's using 200 gallons of water in a saline area, it's lowering that water table even more. Those salts are going to come to the surface. It's kind of this negative feedback loop that it's just creating almost saltier soil out of an already salty soil, because they don't have that opportunity to really wash away from natural processes once salt cedar would get established in some of these areas. So you could think North Dakota, we have a lot of saline areas. That'd be a pretty common area where you could find it here. So North Dakota is no exception to that. We do have a lot of saline areas in the state. Oh, there we go. Another one of the myths they say is, well, salt cedar's allelopathic. And actually there's a study done, plants from Fort Peck were growing in soils dominated by western wheatgrass, which is one of our native grasses. It's really typical actually throughout the state, but further west you get, that's one of our dominant native grasses. The wheatgrass actually grew 73% larger in salt cedar plots than on control plots in this study. And what they really hypothesize is probably the leaf fall and the organic compounds that were in that leaf fall. They have nitrogen and organic compounds, and those long tap roots were maybe mining some of the nutrients that the native grasses weren't getting to, because they were getting down to them, bringing them up. That leaf fall happened. So really that study just suggests there's no evidence really supporting allelopathy in salt cedar. A little bit of the history in the US, it was, nearest I could find was 1823. It was brought here as an ornamental. And in 1828, there was a Philadelphia nursery selling the trees, so it did start East Coast. And in 1868, the USDA was actually raising multiple species of them in the Arboretum. And in the 1870s, it escaped cultivation, but they were still raising them. And in the 1900s, think, wow, the dirty 30s, Dust Bowl era, that's really when it was used extensively for erosion control. So USDA was still at that time promoting it, as an erosion control measure. And a lot of the stuff, again, desert Southwest. 1920s became problematic in a lot of areas, particularly, again, desert Southwest. And I know there's a big gap of 80 to 90 years there. It's just kind of spreading around. You could just imagine it's going from state to state and in different things. And in 2001, really it had gotten so bad. By 2001, the first biocontrol agents were released in cage sites throughout the desert Southwest because, by then, 80 years after, they became really problematic. It's like, wow, we're getting behind mechanical removal and all that. So they're brought in some of the biocontrol agents at that time. History in North Dakota, 1968 was the first report from Benson County. And in 1970, it was reported in Billings County. So thanks, Katie. No, you probably, is she here? Oh, she's not here. And then in the first colonies in 2001, the plants were reported here, which really coincides with the initial survey on the Yellowstone River. And then the Salt Cedar Task Force was developed after kind of those initial almost like colonies of plants were discovered. And that was a department bag. Probably a lot of people in this room, Game and Fish and Corps engineers. And in 2002, it was listed as a noxious weed. The task force developed educational materials. Maybe some of you guys still have some of these old pamphlets around. And the task force and Weed Association also worked with the greenhouses to stop really the sale of salt cedar as ornamentals and erosion control and some of those. It was probably mostly ornamentals at that time. I don't think it was ever widespread here as an erosion control. And in 2007, the Missouri River Watershed Coalition developed a salt cedar management plan, and just kind of, that was a pretty extensive plan going through potential impacts, control efforts, communication, stakeholders, all the things you could imagine go into a very large report. Game and Fish involvement, 2002 were some of the first survey and control efforts on the Missouri Yellowstone River. I would say 2003 to 2010, just kind of business as usual, survey control efforts ongoing. In 2011, statewide, it was massive flooding along both river systems down here. I know Cody was talking, you guys, purple loosestripe, it was post 2011. All of a sudden, well, that's post 2011. That was another, that was for salt cedar up there, no different. Elevated river levels for a very, very long time, getting river levels to basically heights that hadn't seen in probably since the dams were created. The Sakakawea filled and the emergency spillway operated for the first time since it was built. And really the floodplain environment drastically changed above the dam. And well, like you guys said, it drastically changed below the dam as well. That 2011 event had really massive impacts on the river and reservoir system in North Dakota. This is the Missouri River at Williston. This isn't a 2011 photo, but this is a pretty common sight at different times of the year. You can see this is the river bottoms right below Williston, and the ice just goes out, so like we can get ice jams, and the river will back up, and it'll back up into a couple mile wide floodplain, and then the river drops really quick and it gets back into the channel. So it's a pretty dynamic river on that stretch. And this is an aerial photo from 2010. Just zooming in, that's the city of Williston, and then there'd be the Highway 85 bridge right there. And this is a mix of it's Corps engineer property, and a lot of it's managed as wildlife management area below town. So it's kind of a mix between Corps of Engineers and Game and Fish property below there, as well as private land. But you can see, if you look at that photo, it's like, well, you do have kind of those backup areas with where water backs up into, but for the most part, the river channel is staying there. And This is a 2012 photo, and really what you notice are areas like this. Anytime the river took a jog, that's when we had that massive, the river was out of its bank. So instead of the river doing this as it's going along, it basically just went like that. And anytime it was hitting those bends, it was just those massive dumps of sediments, that kind of almost brand new, clean habitat landscape, just brand new soils to colonize is really what happened post 2011, just that massive sediment dump that happened in those river bottoms. And like I had mentioned, it's not just flood events. In the summer or spring, we also get ice jams that are very that can happen. The last major one that we had was in late March, early April of 2019. That's a moose riding an iceberg on the Yellowstone River. So it can there's a herd of deer in the middle of the Yellowstone River, and it's really unique though of the area because it's some of the last really untamed stretches of river in the northern Great Plains. And these rivers are still allowed to be rivers. We haven't necessarily dammed them up, diverted them, all of those things that have created some of these issues in other places with all this diversion. Like, these rivers are still allowed to head cut, to deposit, to do all that stuff. So it is really unique that these rivers are still allowed to basically be rivers yet and do the things that they want to do. But it does create some challenges. So in 2012, when I got on with the department, the survey and control efforts began it up again. And I guess what I like to call that 10-year period of 12 to 22 is kind of the trial and error period, because we had been doing it prior to then, and it's like, well, we just go out and rinse, recycle, repeat. We do the same thing over again. Are we getting anywhere with this and that? So given our environment, like what work, the two questions I wanted to know is like, well, what works, and really what's the best use of our time? Because it seemed like we're spending an awful lot of time on it, or we were spending more and more. And it wasn't just on our properties. I mean, we were talking like we were going on sovereign land, and now River Edge is on private, which is kind of outside of our our realm, but we were still doing it. But we did do a lot on our properties as well in those river bottoms. So our primary survey area again goes from the Highway 85 bridge, basically to the Highway 58 bridge, and then from the confluence down to the Highway 200 bridge there at Cartwright. So on the Yellowstone River, we had about 9 river miles, and on the Missouri River, that is about 28 river miles. So it's pretty extensive. And the other challenging part is there's not a lot of great access points there with boat ramps and all that. So it's like you're looking at, it could be 10 to 15 river miles in between basically access points. So once you're out there, you're kind of out there. And this is just an example from one of the years, our treatment locations. I guess you zoom in, we're kind of similar to you. It was dink, dink, dink. We're just, taking waypoints there and of the different areas we found it. And this is just another map that we had, yep, we're kind of finding it here, here, and here, but it's pretty predictable. It seemed like about every time there'd be one of those like river bends, more or less where the water's going to slow down. It's going to dump that sediment. Well, you got to imagine our seed source is coming from upstream of us. Those seeds are in that sediment load. Every time the river is slowing down in those areas, it's dropping that stuff out. So it's not surprising that we find it where we do. And then upstream, it's pretty hard to go from the Highway 200 bridge to the Montana line. That's a very, very shallow area of the river, so it's pretty hard to get boats up there. I mean, we don't have a jet boat, so I mean, you're looking at in the fall and some of that. I mean, you're looking at really shallow water, so you really can't even get boats up into there to get a lot of it. And then there's really no ramp on the Montana side that you could go kind of the other way. So it's just kind of one of those stretches of river that if the river's high enough, kind of get there when you can. But we found we found a little bit on some of them first islands there. And 2002 to to now it's like, well, there's your big pretty table, all your data. Kind of not really messy, but it's got a lot of data. But this is kind of where we're going to start answering those questions, making those decisions. One thing I do want to note from this is, I got the peak river flow at Sidney, Montana, peak river flow at Culbertson, and this is all the river flows. We get. I just went in and got that data, and it was basically what was the highest that year. I guess the important thing to note is sometimes at Culbertson on the Missouri River, sometimes we have two peaks. Well, this one's the highest one, and those different peaks might not necessarily occur at the same time. So from that table, it's like, well, the peak isn't occurring on the river systems at the same time. We can have just these different flushes there. So it's like the river can go up, go down, go up, go down. Like it's pretty quick, and we can have it happen multiple times throughout a year. In 23, we had two peaks coming down the Missouri there at Culbertson. And then again, it happened a little bit different. It happened right at the beginning of May, almost July. That one happened in April. That one happened in June then. So it's like it's not always the same time every year, which pretty not shocking that it doesn't happen that the same time every year. But that's the one thing I noticed about the Missouri River is we almost get like two flushes, two pulses on the Missouri, whereas the Yellowstone's less, and you have Fort Peck upstream of us. So this probably coincides, I'm thinking, with the Milk River and probably the Poplar River, the dump in there, whatever's happening in those watersheds. That's probably these two pulses. And then if we are getting some Fort Peck releases at the same time. So this one's maybe a little bit more predictable, but we do have that dam upstream. Whereas on the Yellowstone, that's when we really see those. We don't necessarily see two different ones. We'll see one, but normally that one's maybe a little bit more predictable on the Yellowstone. And we call that the June rise. That's the snowpack that's coming out of the Bighorns and Yellowstone and prairie snowpack and some of that. But normally by the time it gets to Sidney and Williston, it's always about that middle of June. And this hydrograph is on the Yellowstone. It's pretty predictable. It just every year it's like you can always figure that mid-June time frame is when we're going to have our biggest flush of water. And the Yellowstone probably contributes a lot more than the Missouri does on an annual basis. But there's some exceptions to that. Like in 2011, we had over 100,000 CFS that was coming down both river systems, and that was the one year where both of them coincided at roughly the same time. So that was an awful lot of water. Whereas some of these other years, 2021, you're looking at pretty low flows overall, and then those peaks are happening at different times. So even if it did add up, it's like, well, it was 40,000 CFS, and it wasn't happening at the same time comparatively to that 2011. Just one of the river systems was almost triple that, in 1 year. Another challenge that we had, well, not only the limited number of boat ramps, but there was a number of years where we didn't have a usable boat ramp. This is at the confluence there of the Missouri and Yellowstone. We didn't have a usable boat ramp until the fall of 2022. So there's about a 3-year period we didn't even have. There really wasn't a boat ramp for 20 some miles there. So, I mean, that's all. If you think you're going to do that, I'm like, it's very logistically challenging to not have. We don't have a lot of boat ramps to begin with, but when you lose one of the main ones that you relied on, that makes things even more difficult. And really, the boat is about the best means of travel, and a lot of times it's your only means of travel because you can't exactly walk everywhere because the mud will just absolutely swallow you up. So it's, pretty difficult. That was one of my seasonal kids. I told him, don't walk over there. Well, he didn't listen to me. And so I threw him a stick, and he got out eventually. So I didn't just leave him there. Another area there would be the estimated number of small plants treated. You can see how that kind of from 2011 on down. And you can see that going back and forth of like, should we do this? Like, we tried to do a bunch, and it's like, I don't know, did it really work? And then it was kind of the going back and forth. It's not that it was like, oh yeah, we treated them all and there's just no plants there. It's like, it was kind of the internal discussion and struggle. It's like, are we making a difference? Are we doing anything? Like, they're still here, it's just, and a lot of those numbers on the small plants, it's nice, kind of nice, big, even numbers with zeros. It's like, that's just really based on kind of what we were estimated, what we could cover in a tank. We kind of counted a couple of them, and it's like, then we just did the multiplier. So it's pretty rough math there. So it's like, were there 15,000? I don't know, maybe there were 30,000, but it's hard to say, but it's like just kind of getting rough numbers, more or less trend data there. And this isn't really anything super scientific. This is how I classified them. Those small plants are the ones that are less than 1.5 feet. So it's those little guys, up to about that. And those are the ones that make that kind of nice carpet. We did from that 15,000, that's some of the years that, well, you can see we did get an ATV out there on one of our properties. So some of the years that we called it beach spraying, it was kind of when it was a carpet there. Some of those years, yeah, we'll go try it. Or if we couldn't get equipment out there, it was too wet or that. So it's like some years we get it out there. So that was kind of the variation on the table. But the beach spraying that we tried, and that's Highway 85. And then it also has, well, much like your purple loose stripe, you were saying the bathtub lines. Well, we have that too. It's the different, but you can see that's just in 1 year. There's 3-4 different elevations just in 1 year as that river's dropping. And that's probably, I mean, if we got 3 different lines there with the hydrograph I was talking about, it's like, well, we have 3 different pulses of water. So that probably makes sense why we can have multiple seed lines in any given year. But sometimes it can just be a mess, and it's just kind of everywhere. Sometimes it's a really nice straight line. Sometimes, depending on what the elevation of some of these sandbars are that's set up, it can just kind of be a carpet. It can kind of be in a line. It can be about everywhere. Call that bank spraying. More or less, that's kind of cut bank, which is a lot more common on, I would say, the Yellowstone than the Missouri stretch. There's a lot more of that kind of steeper cut bank that's on the Yellowstone River. And again, just showing that, it's like, well, kind of that pulse back and forth. That was our own discussion amongst us. That was like, is it working? Is it not? Should we do it? Should we not do it? So that was our own experimentation there. And to get at that, I'm like, okay, we need data already. Let's set up some test plots. Let's find these seed lines. Let's mark them out. Let's GPS them. Let's have a control. Let's spray them. Let's not spray them. Let's, do that. Let's find these lines. And that was going to be my solution to finally putting this to rest. Does it work? Does it not work? Then we have an ice jam, and all my test plots are gone. So the river comes up, the ice washes it out, and everything's gone anyways. So that was kind of my answer there. That was my attempt at it back then to get the definitive answer. But this kind of is the definitive answer. If you think about it, that river is being dynamic on its own. Really, our focus, the large plants treated. You can see after 2011, we kind of clicked along. They didn't find a whole lot of them. That was a little spike in here, but that was before my time. So I'm not sure if they were classifying big like I was. I'm not sure. Like I would say 2012 and on, those are my numbers. So I'm a lot more confident in those. And yeah, they're nice and even numbers. Was it 301? Was it 305? Yeah, maybe, but it's close enough. It's ballpark math. But you can see post that 2011 event, we did have a pretty big slug of years where we cut down a lot of those larger plants. And when I'm talking about a large plant, I'm talking about ones that are greater than that 1.5 feet tall. Some of those that are even 6-8 foot tall. This picture's from the Yellowstone River. And and we struggled with that too, because literature, well, you could foliar spray them and that. So, well, that was our first attempt, was foliar spraying these very large plants out there. But the problem with that was water and chemical takes a lot of water because you got to have that 100% coverage. And when you're on a river and you're 10 miles from a boat ramp and you're sitting there, yeah, pumping. And these boats, I mean, that's only like I think that's a 25-gallon tank that I just modified just to carry the water so we could just mix it when we were out there. That just ended up, we were just running back for water too much, and it was just you just weren't able to carry enough basically water with you on the river. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, you know, necessarily, yeah, not enough water on the river. Boy, that really makes sense. I just lost all my credibility right there. But the water on the river, very sediment laden. So I did try that once, and yeah, everything was clogged. So you really couldn't use that. So yeah, you got to bring the fresh water with you. Our second attempt, it's like, okay, well, let's cut and stump them, and then let's haul them off site, because there was the belief that some of the research had shown, again, a lot of the stuff desert Southwest, there isn't really any data from North Dakota. Desert Southwest, they were saying, well, if you cut and stump them, that above ground portion can basically resprout, then you got another tree. Probably some of that research was some of those 25 footers that had reserves well above the root that they were cutting. You know, we weren't dealing with that tall of plants, but so the research was showing, so we're like, okay, well, let's cut and stump and let's haul this stuff off site. So we did that, just put the little carrots there, stump at the bottom, and we hauled it off site. And yeah, now we're putting that in the boats. Now we're hauling that back and putting it in pickups. And I know you guys talked about burning it, so it's like, well, yeah, we had a couple bonfires later on, and it's like, oh, like this, we did that for a couple of years. Like, well, this is kind of dumb. Like, you know, we got to do something better here. Because that ended up being a lot. Because those years that we had, you know, some of that on the table there is over 700 of them. So it's like, I mean, you're looking at boatloads of stuff coming out of there, and just it ended up just being all chewing up a lot of man hours. So ultimately, what we came up with was our third attempt was what we're going to do is cut and stump times 2 and leave on site. So what do I mean by cut and stump times 2? Well, we're going to treat both ends. We're just going to leave it on site, because our thoughts is even if the top portion, the crown that we're cutting off, is still able to pump, it's like, well, if we stump treat that, hopefully it's drawn enough into that it's just going to kill it, as well as it's killing the stump. So there really isn't much of a chance for it resprouting from that above ground portion that we're cutting off. And I think it does work, because this was a line from 2016, and we go back in 2017, you can see how erosion happens. Well, that's one of our treated ones right there that we found in the same line. So, and that's not, it's not resprouting that little green bit right there, but I'm like, but that's a cut and stump one that it's dead. So what we're doing, that the cut and stump times 2 seems to be working there, and we're getting that kill on those adult plants. And again, this is just kind of showing how it does work. This is the line from 2016, and I got a picture of that stump. Well, that's the same stump in that picture, and it's that line, like they're gone. So it's that's been probably the best method, most effective for us, that is getting the best control. So except for some trophies, we bring those back to the office, you know, if we ever find any of them big ones now, which we haven't found a bunch of them. And this is, so I was kind of curious on something like that. It's like, all right, how old are these? Well, you do a cross section of them, get counting the rings. I figured we cut that, I found that one in 2013, and I figured that was a 15-year-old plant at that time. So that's a pre-2000. So it's been, these plants have been on the river a long time, but that stump is only that big around in 15 years. So these things aren't getting massive, like they're just not getting to be massive trees. And then a lot of times we're only finding one of them. So while the research, again, from Desert Southwest saying, oh, it's these monocultures, it's going to take over the world, is that up here, like we find one. It's just they're not making these crazy monocultures. So the most important thing, what did we learn? Our survey and treatment, we want to do it at about the same time, that late September to early October timeframe. In that part of the world, we have a lot of willows and cottonwoods, and we either have leaf drop or they're turning that yellow color, and salt cedar stays that bluish green a lot later. So if you're floating down the river, I mean, it's super obvious. It's almost that leafy spurge color, that bluish green. Like if you're going there, it's like, I mean, you could be driving down the river 40 miles an hour and yep, there it is. Like once you know what you're looking for, it's almost like you can't miss it. And then knowing where to look again, those areas in the river, like you get really good at reading the river, and it's like, well, if the river was this high, where was the sediment dumping? All right, let's go look there. So you almost just get that search engine built within you of you can eliminate a lot of the landscape. And that was another learning curve thing for us. So 28 miles and 9 miles, a lot of that stuff, like we were walking the entire river. So that was taking a lot of time too. So it's like you're looking at 30 plus miles of walking that we were doing on both sides, splitting up crews, walking down basically from Montana to Williston. We were doing that. So it was, again, a lot of time and effort. So it's like, how do we just get better at this? How, more efficient with our time, more efficient with everything. Really the bank and beach spraying of the small plants, it took a lot of water, a lot of chemical, a lot of personnel, equipment, and time. So what we really figured out is that the bank and the beach spraying it wasn't worth it, because in the other photo of, all right, I'm going to set up my test plots, while my test plots get washed away. Ice jam that year, but they would have washed away anyways in the June rise. So we are lucky because natural river process of ice out and June rise, they're largely doing the work for us up there. They're washing away those seed lines. They're washing that stuff away. And from what we found, they're not reestablishing downstream, even though they have established further upstream, they get washed out. The most important thing that is just focus on those large plants. And especially after a flood event, that's when we want to focus on getting those large plants out of there, because that's probably when they would be more likely to take over, because there's just not that competition if there's a lot of sandbar out there or a lot of that sediment dump. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is focus on large plants, focus after your large flood events, and then you're going to see that drop. And we're to the point where it's like, we haven't even done the survey in a few years. And it's like, we go do it this next year. I don't foresee us seeing over single digits again, because we put in the work on the back end there after that big event. And those large plants we have small plants, but it's like those large ones, when you see them, they're really easy to control. And it's really a one and done. You go there, you cut them, stump them, they're dead. Again, not detecting those large plants at that about 1.5 feet tall or tall annually, it's really not the end of the world, because even though they're considered a seed-bearing tree, we're just not seeing these monocultures creating there. And this photo is this is probably an 8-10 footer. It's a photo from 2022, and after we cut it, counted the rings, it was likely established in 2011, and we didn't detect it for 11 years. Well, but it's one plant. The research would suggest, in other areas, oh God, it's going to take over the river. Well, there were probably thousands of those small seedlings there, but 11 years later, we end up with one tree, cut and stump, we're done. So really those large plants, it's like, we're just not seeing it, the plant really responding in North Dakota. I think a few things are going on. I think we're at the very edge of its range. Maybe our winters are a little bit too extreme for it. I don't know. I kind of had this thought the other day, if they're taking up all this water, and if we don't have a lot of snow cover to insulate them, we have a more open winter, but we always get that 30 below. I don't know. Maybe there's so much water content in them, they're having kind of internal explosions of that. I don't know. I kind of thought this the other day. I'm like, kind of like, well, why? It's like we're kind of at the northern range, so it's like, we have it, but maybe there's just a lot of things working in our favor as far as salt cedar goes. So the future, I would say under kind of the drought conditions similar to 2017 to 2022. An extensive survey is not even possible because the river is just too low to get boats on, and a lot of stuff gets exposed. It's pretty dangerous out. It's fairly dangerous to navigate that river anyways. But just lower river levels make it even more difficult. Limits the accessibility. Some of the ramps aren't usable. And really those seed lines, they get scoured away during annual flood events. And I don't think that they're establishing downstream. I guess I just haven't seen it. And the other thing is, now here we are, well, it's going to be 14 years post 2011 event. The native vegetation, dense stands of willows and cottonwoods that's really limiting our accessibility into there because they're becoming so dense. But that's actually really good news because they're becoming dense and they're outcompeting this stuff. So salt cedar's not really able to outcompete our native vegetation and really limiting any of the potential spread kind of down the line, unless we have another one of those really extreme 2011 events. The future kind of downstream of Williston, in 2016, we did a brief survey on the east side of there. That's one survey in 20 some odd years, and we only found 3 pretty smallish plants on that first island. And then I actually had a moose tag in 2020, so I hunted quite a bit. Those about 8 miles downstream of Williston. You would think that's ideal salt cedar habitat. I know what I'm looking for, and I didn't see any plants down there. And I spent a lot of time on that river. The future upstream of Williston, survey and treatment efforts of, adult plants. So we're thinking probably every 3 to 5 years, if the river and reservoir levels kind of remain where they've been fairly static here lately. So we're thinking just based on what we're seeing, it's like probably doesn't need to be every year, but every probably 3 to 5 years. This was from this last fall. This was on an island on the Yellowstone, and that would have been a 2011 plant, and it's only that tall. So I mean that's a really old plant, and it's in a very kind of dense canopy of there's some Russian olives, willows, and all of that. And I only found one kind of little seed line. Again, that was on the Yellowstone right at the confluence. And I guess another experiment, I GPS this one and I left it alone because I'm really curious because I'm like, it looks like it's a little bit higher. So I'm going to go back this next year and see, did it wash away? Did it get bigger? Or my other thought was these sandbars, a lot of times they get blown clean in the winter. My kind of winter kill hypothesis that, is there a lot of stuff that we're getting winter kill on this? If we don't have a lot of snow cover, if they don't have that insulation, kind of on these sandbars where they're either getting sandblasted or they're just out in the wide open. Maybe there's something like that. So kind of my own little experiment again is like, well, I'm gonna leave it there and go back this next year and see kind of what that little line that I found did as far as population goes. The future upstream of Williston, on the Missouri River on the Montana side there, you can see there's not really too many observations on there. That'd be right about where Fort Peck Dam is. The Montana control efforts are ongoing in the Missouri River and Fort Peck. In 2017, they did about 7 miles of the mussel shell, which is inside the reservoir. And then in 2018, they had a coordinated effort for 114 miles downstream, which would get us to the North Dakota border. So that was kind of their big collaborative effort with state, feds, Corps, tribe, private landowners, just everybody. They did that. And really kind of on that report, what they found is it was fairly close to just right downstream of the dam. And in 2019, there were 18 miles. Again, this is on the other side on the upstream side of Fort Peck above the dam. The 7 Blackfoot drainage, they did 18 miles there. And a lot of that stuff is helicopter work because they're even more isolated than we are out there as far as roads go and all of that. In 21 and 22, they continue, upper reservoir efforts continued with the Corps, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, and they're doing that as lake levels drop, because if you ever been to Fort Peck probably early 2000s, it was kind of the salt cedar forest up above there. And 2011, by and large, a lot of those plants flooded out. So a lot of their salt cedar was established way down low. Then it became pike and walleye habitat for about a decade. And, now as the reservoir's dropping again, they still have that seed source upstream coming. So as it's dropping, they kind of learn their lesson there, and they're keeping up on it. So those kind of levels don't necessarily establish again and take over their shoreline habitat as well. The future upstream of the Yellowstone, I looked, I think there's a speaker tomorrow, so maybe you'll get a little bit more info. There's kind of a hot spot right around there, right around Billings. They'll probably, I would imagine this maybe is what he's going to talk about. The Montana control efforts along the Yellowstone River in 17, 18, and 22 in Yellowstone County. So that'd be Billings. Their 22 report, they were almost $140,000. And a lot of that was it was kind of a mix of vehicle and helicopter, I think, spraying as well. And something I noticed I was reading a couple of their reports to see, and one thing that's really evident is, because they're saying, like in their report, they were showing areas that it's like they're showing really tall trees. They are getting that kind of dual, triple, almost like canopy of the plants, and that's on the same river system, but 5 hours away in Billings compared to by Williston. But the thing of the river system there, you notice on the Yellowstone, instead of that more sediment, sand, mucky stuff that we have, they've got a lot more rock and cobble, which I think that's probably contributing. That would be my guess. It's just not as maybe good of an environment to get that multi-year kind of age structure. Maybe our portion of the river is more erodible, and it's washing away every year a lot easier than on the upper end of the Yellowstone River. And lazy day on the river, the end. So I have taken up enough of your time between you and your evening entertainment. I guess, are there questions? There we go. Have I seen like?
Where it's even a small area where nothing else.
No, if on those some of those pictures where you got, like you called it, the bathtub line. What's interesting is there's willows, there's cottonwoods, there's salt cedar. There's your other annuals that are just coming up in that washed in the river. So there is a very diverse community, and that's what I'm saying, that our native vegetation, because we do have the cottonwoods, we do have that river system that's still dynamic, it's still cutting, we still have that. That's what cottonwoods need. They need that open bare soil as well, and they're all establishing at the same time, it seems like. And then now here we are 14 years later, and I think our native community, is so strong now on those areas that were high up. The more consistent down low that's scouring every year, it's still there. I mean, you can go out in any given year, and I can go find a seed line somewhere on the Yellowstone. Like, you can hop out on any sandbar and you'll find one, but we're just not seeing that. You might have 10,000 of them, but is treating that 10,000 worth it, or just let's go after the one? And that's what I found. I guess again, that might be different in other areas. Like, this is kind of our region specific what we're finding, but maybe it is applicable with some of the climate stuff going on. Because like all North Dakota's cold. I mean, go outside today. So it might be fairly applicable, in other areas of the state too. But as far as here goes, that's what we found.
Any other questions for Todd? Thank you, Todd.